Since Monday night, there has been some craziness revealed by phone cameras. We're going to dive into it and why this NFL player might be the dumbest dude on the planet living in this very moment. We're also going to get into a special college football talent and where he may or may not end up and who he compares to in the NFL draft, as well as talking about the Houston Astrogate. We'll finish up the show today with my NFL predictions and get to it. There's only 2 games, so that should be a quicker segment than usual. And that will be the show today. As always, don't forget to subscribe and rate to the podcast. Share it as much as you can because I am giving the best information and opinion there is. Also, lastly, don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ChrisRennieCFB. As well as the show at Chris Rennie Show on Twitter. Have not made the Instagram or Facebook yet. We're going to cultivate a following on one and then expand because that's how it works. Thanks for listening and hopefully you enjoy the show. I can't do this anymore. What's this guy saying? Who gave these national radio hosts these jobs? Jeez. Can't even understand that guy. What's he even talking about? I can't take it anymore. Those national media personalities making you feel like that, make a change. Listen to this idiot about the sports that matter from the opinion that matters. Haha, you said it, not me. Now for today's takes from the most opinionated host in sports talk. That is right, I am here. It is Christopher Rennie, the best opinion in sports talk, bringing you the sports that matter from the only opinion that truly does matter, at least to me. I'd say I'm very proud of my first 2 episodes, albeit technical difficulties. The topics were hard-hitting, the journalism very deep and in-depth. The picks, not great, and I'm glad I'm not as famous as Colin Cowherd, because Dan Le Batard really did let into them. Now, the national championship game was Monday, and LSU did a great job and solidified their place in history. And I did not pick them to win because, like I said last weekend, once again, was not great for me pick-wise. So LSU ended up beating the Clemson Tigers 42-25, and in the second quarter put on an absolute offensive clinic. Beautiful. The story should be the players. It should be Joe Burrow's 463 yards and 5 touchdowns, the greatest championship performance from a quarterback in college football history. Right? Clyde Edwards-Helaire battles back from a hamstring injury, gives him 110 yards rushing. Crazy. Joe Burrow, huge rushing yards. Jamar Chase, 221 yards and 2 touchdowns. You know, Justin Jefferson played great, and now he's on the wrong side of a headline. You know, granted, you know, you can throw the blame and be like, these LSU players, they need to be punished or whatever. The school needs to be looked at. But that's not their fault. 2 young college kids living in the moment. Seeing a legend they grew up idolizing. Seeing the person they wanted to come to that university to become. And what happened? Why are we talking about that and not the game? It's because OBJ, Mr. Cool Guy, changed every guy's hair for a little bit. Every single kid, you'd see at least 1 or 2 guys per football team when I was in high school rocking the Honey Badger look, the OBJ look, you know, whoever idolized that, you know, whoever you grew up watching that highlighted hair. It was a very, very interesting time for male hair. But the guy, OBJ, he's been in the headlines for all the wrong reasons since he's entered the league, including his boat trip, his yacht trip to Miami the week before a playoff game where he was just having fun. You know, no big deal, but, you know, the Giants have been bad ever since. OBJ's career has been up and down ever since. You know, he's had his run-ins with Instagram models, white powdered substances in the background, egotistical spouts with coaches and players, running into kicking nets. He's always in the headlines, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for bad reasons. And there's actually a direct comparison to what happened at the game. Tyrann Mathieu was there, the honey badger, a guy who got in trouble for the draft, a guy who smoked weed and got busted and ended up checking himself into rehab and getting his life on the right track. He was there as well. And every time you saw the camera flash to him, he wasn't drawing attention to himself. He was getting attention because he's a legend and he led LSU to a national title appearance. But he wasn't making any actions towards himself. The whole time, every time they cut to OBJ, he was dancing around, hyping up people, slapping fives with players on the sidelines, being a distraction. And luckily enough, LSU had the talent to overcome it. When you compare him to Tyrann Mathieu, who was a guy who was active in talking to young players and coaching them up and being positive more so than a negative on the sideline, it really brings an interesting dynamic. And that's not even the problem I'm getting to. Now, personally, I'm all for a good time. I love having fun when I go to football games. It's all about throwing back a few tall boys and having fun with the boys. That's what football games are for. But when you're on the sideline, there's a different set of criteria on the way you can act. He's lucky he's Odell Beckham Jr. because any other casual fan who's watching that game on the sideline would have been thrown out immediately. So the problem started Monday, literally minutes after the game. A viral video went up, and Odell Beckham Jr. was slapping hundreds of dollar bills into hands of LSU football players. One of them a star in Justin Jefferson, who's draft eligible, fortunately for him, but the other was not. When you look at Jontre Kirkland, he is probably coming back to school. And that puts his eligibility at risk for just this one little small moment of fun. It was OBJ not thinking, it was OBJ not being a leader. And if both wanted to return to school, he put his former university into a bad spot. And now LSU is talking about distancing themselves from their former player in Odell Beckham, which is a smart move after what happened. You don't want to get into the NCAA's wrong graces because they could just as easily start looking deeper into that hospital guy embezzling money. And they already gave you a pass for that one. So why, poke the bear a little bit more? You can't blame the kids for this one. You got to blame Odell Beckham Jr. because Odell Beckham Jr. should have known better. And, the funniest thing was their first excuse was that was novelty money. Odell Beckham Jr. is not going through the trouble of getting fake money. He is rolling up with his $100 bills like any young rich professional would. And I just thought that excuse was humorous. Right? That's funny. That's funny stuff, the excuse. And I don't really have a bone to pick here. I'm just presenting the facts and what I saw. It was a bad look for Odell Beckham Jr. And guess what? The story should have ended, right? But no. It gets it gets worse. And I am laughing right now. I'm trying to hold it back. But if you haven't yet, there's a video of a New Orleans Saints security guard going around checking to see if the minors are drinking alcoholic beverages and trying to do his job and make sure that it's a no-smoking environment because that's the rules and that's what he's hired to do. So yes, was he overreaching on his powers, allegedly, his alleged power? A little bit. But what happened next? OBJ then goes and slaps the security guard in the derriere as the Southern lawyer who was presented with this case had to describe it. OBJ smacked a security guard in the ass. What? A guy with a badge and a gun, he slapped him in the butt, man. Anyone else does that, they're getting detained on the spot. He got away with it. It's one of those aspects of like fame that he thinks he's above the rules, and that should bother people, and it doesn't. I think this isn't something that should spark any conversations about police brutality or treatments of student athletes with money, either of these two stories. But, I think it's okay to say, okay, boomer to the cop for trying to take the cigars from the players, and also think what OBJ did was reprehensibly stupid. It's a lack of respect for another human being. If that remember that guy who got arrested for slapping the female reporter on the butt while he was running? That's the same thing. Just because it's a guy and a guy doesn't make it any different. A guy was trying to do his job and was prevented from doing it because of harassment. That is sexual battery. That is illegal. He should have been charged with it. Will this case go through? Absolutely not. But going up in arms about this is the wrong one, and you're on the wrong side if you think it's just okay to slap a cop on the butt. It was one of the dumbest things I've seen caught on camera. It was the dumbest thing I've seen on camera from an athlete since Baker Mayfield thought he could elude the police. I just don't know what he was doing, and I, over the years, have grown to try to appreciate Odell Beckham Jr.'s talent, but I feel like every time I do, and I just try to look at the talent versus the antics and trying to compare the emotion to the play on the field, and the way it looks, it's just sometimes optically he's not great. And you have to realize that. And, history does come with it because people always compare him to Tom Brady, yelling at the coaches and all that stuff. Well, one plays with emotion, and they both play with emotion. That's not really up for debate. But you can see the difference. And Tom Brady would never slap a cop on the butt, no matter what. OBJ did. You look even deeper into this. Where was Tyrann Mathieu? He was not causing antics. It was kangaroo court in that locker room, yes. Even during Ed Orgeron's speech, the one he should be giving to his players that won and accomplished one of the greatest things, OBJ had to cut in. This is one of the first times I agreed with Barstool Sports in a while. Look at OBJ looking for attention again. 3 times, one night. Got all the attention he wanted. All for the wrong reasons. Now, people can defend him. And that can lead to the bigger problems and discussing those in America, the disrespect of law enforcement and all that, but I'm not going to go there. I just think what he did was stupid. And I think it was disrespectful to another human. And was the arrest warrant a little far? Yes, but it was, in all legal accounts, a crime. And it was against an officer of the law. So it was a rough night for Odell Beckham Jr. And I think a lot of it is just probably blamed on the Hennessy, but you can't do that. And you can't do what he did. That was pretty poor. It was a poor example of leadership. It was a bad example for the student athletes who he is idolized by. And it was just a poor representation of the guy at the national championship game, and there's not much more to it than that. I think this should probably just blow over. I don't think it should go much further than it already has, but it's just something you need to talk about because in 6 months when he's causing problems on the field, this type of stuff's going to be brought up. And I saw on Twitter that people are saying that OBJ is going on this crazy Antonio Brown path, but I don't think that's true at all. I think OBJ got caught in the moment, was having fun, and he ended up doing some stupid things. Now, it's kind of getting hard to use the excuse that he's a young guy because I'm 23 years old, and there is no single part of my brain that would have done any of what he did that night. And that is something you also have to think about. I think Clay Travis actually made a good point here that he thinks he is above the rules, and at 27 years old, it's time to grow up and start being a professional. Plain and simple. OBJ, I get it. It's fun to have fun. But that's not fun. That's just being idiotic. So next time you're in a position and you slap a police officer on the butt and tell him to get his gun, just don't do it. Is that really hard to ask? You should never have to ask your own man to not slap a cop on the butt. And there's people defending him, and that bothers me just as much. And I don't even care about the cops, but, like, that was so freaking stupid. Yes, you can... Okay, Boomer, the old police security guard. Yes, ruining all the fun of these kids who just won the national championship. Let them smoke their cigars. They earned it. LSU can pay the fine. OBJ, don't smack the dude on the butt. I don't think it's that complicated. I don't think there's this huge, big diversity thing that's being blown up by all these people. I think it's pretty dumb to actually bring that into it. It was stupid. People comparing it to Julian Edelman. What Julian Edelman did was dumb as hell too. Doesn't make it any different. Who climbs drunk on a Mercedes? Who slaps a cop in the ass? These are just both bad things. It's not white, black. Stop it. It's just a dumb thing. That's my last take on this. That's it. Now I'm out. We're on to the next one. All right. The next one's a little bit more positive because I'm actually very proud to claim this man as my own. We are both fellow Ohio State alums. That's pretty cool. We're in the same club. Very exclusive club that only the select few get to join every single year, even though my fall graduation class had like 2,000 people at it. So it's even bigger in the spring at 12,000. Joey B, me and you were Buckeyes for life. Real talk. You did it for the Tigers, but you know where you started. You know your roots. That's how it is. So Joe Burrow had arguably the picture-perfect football season, and I think if you're sitting in your car or sitting at home listening to this or working out listening to this, think to yourself, name like the last time you remember a quarterback having that level of a year in a season and having all the accolades to go with it. So obviously there's quarterbacks like Johnny Manziel. There's guys in like smaller schools like Colt Brennan, Kellen Moore, smaller guys who put up absurd stats, but you never really had that combination of both. Even looking back at Deshaun Watson, he put up some big numbers, but he had arguably the greatest quarterback season ever, and it was sort of that road to glory, NCAA 13, NCAA 14 dream season you always had. And, he earned every single ounce of it through hard work, working through the system. He has one of the most stone-cold looks I've ever seen on the field from any football player of all time. I've never seen such a calming presence. And even when things were going poorly early against Clemson, his facial expression never changed. And I don't think people realize how much that can do for the rest of the team from a leadership standpoint. When you have a guy who's level-headed, it rubs off right from the start. And when you have a guy who's not scared to take the challenges of coming back from a deficit like that, you saw it in Trevor Lawrence against Ohio State. You saw it in Joe Burrow. They just have this. It's Justin Fields has it too. But Joe Burrow's a little different with it. He's in that fifth year. He's learned. He was in a moment, and he got into that Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, I'm scoring 23 straight zone in that second quarter, and it just went from there. And this season, he broke records of efficiency, quarterback rating, completion percentage, touchdown passes. He threw 60 of those bad boys to 6 interceptions. And he etched his place into the history books. Well deserved. I have talked about this on Twitter a lot, in the comments on The Athletic this week. And one thing that bothers me so much is just this sudden rewrite of history that Joe Burrow wasn't given a fair shot at Ohio State. And this is not a knock on him. When you look at Ohio State's history over the last 5 years, JT Barrett took over for Braxton Miller after Braxton Miller threw out his shoulder and was a 3-year incumbent. And Joe Burrow lost the backup job to Dwayne Haskins that season, and then he was the third string on the depth chart. And then JT Barrett in his 4th season was... So JT Barrett in his 4th season, it was JT Barrett, Dwayne Haskins, Joe Burrow. You know what Dwayne Haskins did that year. JT Barrett ran into the camera guy, then got hurt during the game. And then Dwayne Haskins came in with one of the legendary comebacks in the rivalry and one of the most legendary entries into the game, one of the biggest rivalries in the sport, and took over. So when we do this revisionist history sort of ordeal, you sort of forget that part. And yes, Joe Burrow took Dwayne Haskins nose to nose, but we also forget that Dwayne Haskins set every single Big Ten passing record in a single season, and then also got invited to New York. Wow, Joe Burrow in that same year threw 16 touchdown passes to 2,800 yards. And not all of that was Joe Burrow's fault. You can blame the system for a good portion of that. But Dwayne Haskins, the one year he started, played himself into a first-round draft pick, very similar to what Joe Burrow did this year. And yes, Joe Burrow found his way in Louisiana. You got to give him all the credit for betting on himself and transferring and not waiting that out, because he may have never got that chance to play. And Joe, congratulations on your national championship, and I have all respect for you. And you know, it's just, I am tired of this revisionist history. Joe Burrow got a fair shot, and he transferred, and he ended up in a great place and ended up really identifying with the culture of LSU and becoming a legend and doing great things with the platform he was given and winning the awards and the accolades and leading his team to a championship. It's just that revisionist history. But getting back to the point, Joey B to the NFL. So if you compare to the level he was able to rise to and lead his team to, and there are debates on if this season of his is the most impressive individual season in college football history. Now you've got the likes of Herschel Walker, Barry Sanders, Roger Staubach, all the way back to like Chick Hurley, Red Grange. So it's really hard to put this into a perspective of all eras, but Joe Burrow didn't really pioneer anything. Joe Burrow didn't really change anything, and LSU has always been a pretty solid football team. They've just always been missing that high-level quarterback play, and the two times they've had NFL-level quarterback play, Matt Flynn, Joe Burrow, they won national titles, so it shows the level of talent LSU's capable of acquiring, right? You hear me there? Joe Burrow came in and did something no other quarterback has done, broke a passing touchdown record. No, obviously, that is literally an objective measure on how you can have one of the best seasons as a quarterback ever. Yes, he's loaded with weapons, but some guy had Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry, and they won like 10 or 11 games. So it's not always just the quarterback, but the quarterback makes a big difference when one guy can play at almost the perfect level of quarterback almost the entire season. So I think Cam Newton's was just a tad bit more impressive. The way he carried Auburn, who wasn't even really a legitimate title contender before the season. I know LSU wasn't everybody's favorite, but I think people thought if Joe Burrow even improved to like a 30-touchdown guy, LSU would have had a legitimate title shot this year. But he even took it to another level than that and another level above that. So I'm a guy who's plagued by recency bias, so it took me stepping away from what Joe Burrow accomplished, just really look at this in a vacuum. And it was inarguably one of the top 3 quarterback performances in the last like 20 years. Him, Cam Newton, and Tim Tebow's promise run, where Tim Tebow made the promise that he was going to play the hardest and do all that stuff and practice the hardest and throw the best and run the hardest, that whole speech. And Joe Burrow was very smooth. He talked well in interviews. He was very confident, borderline on to cocky, but never really got to that threshold. And, you know, set expectations high for himself and this team, and they, from the jump, went above and beyond the expectations for him. And I think he obviously played himself into being the number 1 pick. I don't think there's any argument there. I think he's right now, with his health, the best quarterback in the draft, and he's got the build for it. He's strong, he's athletic, he's good in the pocket, he's very calm, he's very good. He's raised in a football family. The X's and O's are always going to come a little easier to him because he grew up around it. and he's played under Joe Brady, a guy who implemented a ton of NFL concepts into the passing game of LSU, which is an advantage going into the draft. And if I am Cincinnati, he's the can't-miss guy in the draft. So I've seen some comparisons thrown around, and this is the first thing I want to touch on. So there are quite some comparisons for Joe Burrow. The first one I saw, and this one bothered me, it was by Mr. Colin Cowherd on The Herd, and he said he's Andy Dalton. That is just wrong, incorrect, a fallacy. I've seen some guys throwing around Baker Mayfield because of the level of production they were able to have and sort of the route they took with transferring. That one's cheap. Just because both guys transferred does not mean they're the same quarterback. Joe Burrow, stronger arm, better ball, better athlete than Baker Mayfield. And if I was the Browns, I'd take Joe Burrow right now over Baker Mayfield, period. And then the next guy I saw today, Joel Klatt compared him to Joe Montana. Joe Montana is arguably the greatest quarterback of all time and the greatest quarterback to ever play the game. He had a very calming presence like Joe Burrow. He was one of those guys who was always Cool Joe. That was his nickname, so that could fit for both of them, to be honest. And Joe Montana sort of dominated in his time at Notre Dame and got drafted to one of the best offensive systems, which will not happen with Joe Burrow going to the Bengals. He will be in Zach Taylor's system, which will be a typical NFL offensive system. Then you have Tom Brady. Joe Burrow's a way better athlete than Tom Brady, and Tom Brady couldn't dream about touching the levels of athleticism as he was. But where this comparison does make a little sense is that level of competitiveness that drives him, and there's really not much you can say differing them. They're just so both cool, they're both calm, they're both collected, and I think that's where the Joe Montana and Tom Brady ones make sense. I think Joe Burrow has a better arm than both of these guys had. His accuracy in the NFL will be what separates him on if he can continue with his anticipation and that level of anticipation he had in college at the next level. One of those aspects of NFL quarterbacking that is very, very interesting is how you always hear these quarterbacks say that a lot of the time you're going to throw into windows that aren't even really there until you have made those throws a couple times, because NFL players are so quick, the windows are so small, and sometimes there's not really even a window that you can visually see, but you know it's there because you've made the throw, you've seen the throw done before, and that's what Joe Burrow did all year. His fade route to Jamar Chase, the guys were even, he was in phase, and he let the ball fly to one place where he can catch it, and that's NFL quarterbacking. And that's where you see Joe Burrow's biggest strength right now, and the way how slow the college game was for him. Now, I'm going to get to where I think he compares to when it comes to NFL quarterbacks. And to me, there's three comparisons that are very prudent to who Joe Burrow is and what he can become as an NFL quarterback. So to me, the first one is Matthew Stafford. So Matthew Stafford, quarterback Georgia, he was a 3-year starter. Came in, started, played in all 13 games as a freshman. Had a rough year, 1,700 yards, 7 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. Improved throughout, 19-10 his second year, touchdown-interception ratio. And then his senior year, he threw for 3,500 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. And that's sort of similar offense because Georgia hasn't changed in like 3 decades to the one that Jake Fromm was currently in. The one aspect of Georgia's offense that year that is very forgotten is how good Noshawn Marino was in college. So they were really heavily reliant on the run game, and that led to Matthew Stafford pushing the ball vertically quite a bit. Matthew Stafford was known for his touch of the football, sound familiar, and his arm strength, sound familiar, and his sneaky athleticism, sound familiar. Joe Burrow's a little bit better of an athlete. Matthew Stafford has a little bit better of an arm, but both guys dominated college football with extreme levels of anticipation and extreme levels of confident quarterback play. The next comparison on my list that I will talk about is Andrew Luck. The difference between Joe Burrow and Andrew Luck is Andrew Luck was the most touted quarterback prospect his 3 years at Stanford. From the time he was in high school to the time he graduated from Stanford with his architectural degree and went to the draft, Andrew Luck was going to be the number one pick. And Robert Griffin came onto the scene and had a great year, but Andrew Luck was the can't-miss quarterback prospect, the best quarterback prospect since John Elway. And Andrew Luck, his final stats in a Jim Harbaugh offense. So you see how offensively challenged those Michigan teams have been. This is in a Jim Harbaugh offense. He threw for 3,500 yards, 37 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. So, great quarterback. Guess what Andrew Luck's strengths were? His ball placement, his accuracy, his anticipation. Those are all Joe Burrow's strengths. Both really good athletes, exceptional athletes, like to run a little bit, like to put their body on the lines a little bit. That's what these two do great. And they are both highly touted draft prospects. Joe Burrow had to earn his way a little bit more to that point than Andrew Luck. Obviously, both extremely talented. I'm not knocking Andrew Luck for earning his way to the number one pick. It's not something you're just given. But Joe Burrow had a different path to it. And then my final comparison is Carson Palmer, the former Bengals, Raiders, and Arizona Cardinals quarterback. Carson Palmer, former USC quarterback, played in one of those fun little early Pete Carroll offenses with like the likes of Steve Sarkisian and Lane Kiffin and those fun guys. And in his final year, 2002, we remember how pass-happy college football was then. He threw for almost 4,000 yards, 33 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. He was a Heisman winner, just like Joe Burrow. And guess what? He was drafted to the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, that comparison, I think you guys are going to look at me like I'm insane, but guess what? Carson Palmer was a very talented athlete and a very good thrower of the football. Went to college for 5 years. Was the can't-miss Heisman-winning prospect of the draft. The guy who will change your franchise. The guy who's a born winner. The calming presence. The guy who's always going to win the game. That Carson Palmer, you know. His teams at USC were getting built, and when he played in college, USC had been pretty down for quite some time. And in his final season, playing under Norm Chow and his young offensive staff, LSU went 11-2 in Pete Carroll's second year. And that's when you saw the program start building because he led it. The fortunate thing for Joe Burrow was the groundwork was laid at LSU. He just had to play quarterback at the level he did to get him to the promised land, and he did. And now both quarterbacks had very similar careers. Obviously, Palmer's was at one place, but still, 5 years of college, Heisman winners, school record holders in touchdowns, passing yards, all that fun stuff. The comparison makes more sense the more I talk about it. So don't look at me like I'm crazy. And they're going to get drafted to the same organizations. And you know the comparison about all three of these that's crazy is the Lions, historically bad franchise. The Colts, pre-Peyton Manning and post-Peyton Manning, historically bad franchises. And Carson Palmer to the Bengals, a historically bad franchise since Paul Brown left. And Mike Brown took over the organization as a leader. In their times, these three quarterbacks in college were models of efficiency and unfortunately were never set free in the modern offenses of this era. But were very highly touted draft prospects, all Heisman finalists, all winners in their own regard. Joe Burrow falls in this category. All three of these guys elevated franchises. All three of these guys have taken these franchises on their shoulders and put them in places that were impossible without extreme talents at the quarterback position because they are poorly led. And that's what Joe Burrow is getting himself into. So when you look at future NFL career success, Joe Burrow is very talented, but he's not Aaron Rodgers. He's not Patrick Mahomes. He doesn't have that special juice in the arm that can take you to that next level without the talent. The way he's going to have to win is being kind of like Tom Brady. But I can tell you the Bengals aren't going to be as well run as the Patriots. So his career, I think, is going to follow a path very similar to those three guys, unless the Bengals somehow revamp their entire regime and just get their whole infrastructure. If that doesn't get fixed, Joe Burrow has a chance to, be great and elevate a franchise. And that's what he's going to be asked to do. So that's why I compared him to those three guys, because that's what those three guys did. Believe it or not, Carson Palmer got the most out of the Bengals. Matthew Stafford's gotten the most out of the Lions when he's played. And Andrew Luck, when healthy, man, got him to AFC championships. So, yeah, that's what that's all about. So that kind of takes me into the next segment, because that's been a pretty big conversation topic this week. I've noticed on Twitter and with NFL draft pundits and who he compares to. And I think it's dumb to try to compare a quarterback to another quarterback, because even guys that are similar play the game different, prepare for the game different. Like Baker Mayfield got Drew Brees comparisons. Drew Brees is way better than Baker Mayfield in one important aspect, and that's the way he handles the media. Personality-wise, Drew Brees is just more of a naturally inclined leader. He doesn't need to create a chip on his shoulder to sort of have the chip on his shoulder. That's what I feel Baker's biggest issue is, and if he can fix that and be better, I can sort of see the Drew Brees comparison a little more. But one's a gunslinger, one is very calculated. Joe Burrow is not any of these quarterbacks. He is like these quarterbacks. And I think Joe Burrow's personality of these three mirrors the closest to Andrew Luck. And I think his skill set mirrors the closest to Matthew Stafford and Carson Palmer. But I just think mentally, all three of those guys were ahead of the curve. And I think that's where Joe Burrow is. And I think going into the league he's in a great place mentally and physically. And he came off one of the most impressive years, and you've got to give him credit for that. So that takes me into what they're talking about. Once again, just like my title, news pundits talk and sports heads roll. And my eyes end up rolling a lot more than they don't. So a big conversation topic this week has been, what's his face? The clown, Mr. Antonio Brown. The biggest clown in the sports world right now. Last time I saw him, he was yelling at his baby mama in IG for trying to steal his Bentley. Those problems, honestly, I can never imagine having. But the biggest issue with this was he broadcasted it on Instagram Live. And, once you put your family affairs in the public, they are everybody's affairs. And, I don't know the whole story. I don't know why the baby mama was trying to steal the Bentley or Rolls Royce, whatever the car was, with a flat tire. I don't know how the tire got flat. Antonio Brown had a package of penis gummies, so that's an interesting aspect to this story that sort of came into the news as well. This is not the first time Antonio Brown has been in the news for negative things. So the story I'm going to talk about, though, isn't that. Antonio Brown's lawyer has stopped representing him because it is just too hard of a job. Literally, that happened. And agent Drew Rosenhaus has split from covering him and representing him because of the problems like the IG Live and the cryotherapy and the drama he caused and the rape accusation. And until all that stuff is figured out, so until the civil suit on the rape case is figured out, until he receives counseling help, Drew Rosenhaus has distanced himself from one of his clients, which is very rare because Drew Rosenhaus is not a guy who has morals. So there's a shot at one of the premier NFL agents. He will represent anyone as long as they make him big money. And if he's splitting from a guy. He split from Johnny Manziel. Saw how that turned out. He's out of the league. And he split from Antonio Brown. So I think the infamous receiver, as I went through his more recent troubling antics, that's not even going back to his time on the Pittsburgh Steelers, has ruined his chance of re-entering the league. And if you still support Antonio Brown in any way, you are going to get checked out of my life. He is a Steeler and he is a terrible person. And if you support him, you are not a good person and you need to check your moral compass. I hope he receives counseling. I do not like the guy, but I do not want to see this guy get to the point where his life is taken from himself. I think this is bigger than football, but he needs help. That's just the truth. And if you disagree, you're also wrong and you're an enabler. CTE has been thrown around. It's not CTE. CTE is degenerative. It takes time. It is long developing. CTE will not affect a guy who just quit playing the game 6 months ago, 5 months ago. Yes, head trauma can lead to different problems with mental capacity and your emotions and all that stuff. But CTE is not a short-term thing. If you throw around CTE for any guy who's doing crazy things, I even saw it getting thrown around for Odell Beckham Jr. That guy hasn't even really he's never had a concussion on the injury list in the league. I looked. And obviously I didn't look deeply, so if I'm wrong about that, don't quote me on it. But it's just this boogeyman that people are just using as an excuse, and that's just as dangerous as the NFL hiding the results on what happened to the brain. To be honest, he's just a bad guy. Fame went to his head. He's going to lose his money. He's going to end up broke. His business dealings aren't great. He's lost every single important business person that's helped him. So he needs to look in the mirror, get help, and do right by his kids and receive the counseling he needs. So that is what they are talking about with Antonio Brown. The next one is Dave Aranda to Baylor. Now, Baylor's coach Matt Rule said he had to stay in college for the kids. And guess what? The Panthers offered him a crap ton of money and pissed off a lot of owners because they're like, well, you just reset the market. And that guy obviously didn't deserve it. So what do you think Bill Belichick's going to ask for? That guy's worth way more than Matt Rule. Not the issue I'm talking about. Dave Aranda, the defensive coordinator from LSU, engineered stopping Trevor Lawrence, the first defensive coordinator to do that, even though I give more credit to Joe Burrow for beating Trevor Lawrence than him. And Dave Aranda is a very good football coach. He's coached LSU for quite some time, and he is a defensive coordinator who's done a great job everywhere he's been as a coach. And I think this is a guy who knows how to recruit, can recruit the South very well, can go into Texas and win some recruiting battles. So I think it's a good hire for Baylor to get Dave Aranda. I think he's a very safe hire, but I think he can really build on what Matt Rule built. So the next thing they're talking about, and this one goes to baseball, and I've been talking a lot of baseball pretty early into the year this year. Jessica Mendoza, one of the best women's softball players of all time, former gold and silver medalist for U.S. softball, current employee for the Mets, and current analyst for ESPN, that's the term I was looking for, blamed Mike Fiers, a pitcher, for what is going on in Houston. He said she didn't like the way he handled it. She didn't like the way that he left the team and then said the stuff. You know, there's no wrong time to say the right thing, Jessica Mendoza. And I know you just got hired by the Mets, and I'm going to talk about this actually in my next segment in Astrogate. But, man, you know, Mike Fiers did the right thing, came out, said what was going on. The MLB investigated it, and you can call him a snitch, you can call him whatever you want. But what Jessica Mendoza said condoned cheating, and I'm going to try to find that on my phone real quick. I've got it saved and bookmarked. So here is Jessica Mendoza on Golic and Wingo this morning talking about how she felt about the former pitcher Mike Fiers going public with this.
I mean, I get it. If you're with the Oakland A's and you're on another team, I mean, heck yeah, you better be telling your teammates, look, hey, heads up, if you hear some noises when you're pitching, like this is what's going on for sure. But to go public, yeah, that it didn't sit well with me. And honestly, it made me sad for the sport that that's how this all got found out. I mean, this wasn't something that MLB naturally investigated or that even other teams complained about because they naturally heard about and then investigations happened. But it came from within. It was a player that was a part of it, that benefited from it during the regular season when he was a part of that team. And that, when I first heard about it, it hits you like any teammate would, right? It's something that you don't do. I totally get telling your future teammates, helping them.
So, what? All right. So I'm going to go back to the beginning where she said, I get telling your current teammates and using that to help them. So when you hear a sound, that means that the Astros are cheating. And she said he used it to benefit himself. Well, he himself is a pitcher. And I know Trevor Bauer also accused the Astros for cheating with their pitchers. But what is that argument? You know, it's one of those arguments where you sort of get into the root of it and you're like, the sanctity of the game is broken when a team cheats. And Mike Fiers was part of that team, and he had claimed he felt wrong. But, you know, when you're in that locker room, you cannot tell. And he got out of the locker room. And, yes, it's beneficial to the AL West that people know. But it's also beneficial to the league that Mike Fiers took control and took the situation into his own hands and said what he said. Because if not, we would still be having these conversations with the Astros. And, you know, she then goes on and says it wasn't naturally investigated. That's also a lie. There's been 2 years of investigation into the Astros. Trevor Bauer said it. Tons of MLB players have said it. And then there's also been accusations of other sign stealing. So the rest of the league is not in the clear. It is not cut and dry. And there's a lot of teams who have been playing the game honestly who are being wronged right now because teams are utilizing technologies that are not allowed, that are helping players in the game. And honestly, it's getting me to the point where I'm starting to question where she's coming up with these ideas. And then you look at her alliance right now. She is currently an analyst for the Mets, and she's employed by them. And the manager was on that World Series team that cheated, Carlos Beltran. And that takes me into Astrogate. We're just going to get started in this conversation right now. This is the biggest disgrace to baseball since the Black Sox scandal in the early 1900s. This is steroid era bad. But the thing is, in the steroid era, everyone was cheating. And the people who weren't wanted to cheat. So, this one, no one else right now has done anything near this. This is honestly worse than what the Black Sox did because the Black Sox at least benefited someone else. The Astros took advantage of rules that had not really completely been in place yet. Some gray areas. They denied it. They lied about it. And the fallout's been absurd and well-deserved. Carlos Beltran stepped down as the Mets manager. Alex Cora was fired. David Hinch and the GM, whatever his name, Loom now, are fired. And yes, the Astros have played on the fence of the moral decisions and the moral compasses. So you look at that, and the Astros are not a clean organization. And they tanked before tanking was cool and tanked at levels that the rest of the league saw as like putrid and a disgrace to the game. And the Astros have disgraced the games in many ways. And now there's these accusations, and you have people like Mendoza who are getting mad at Mike Fiers for coming out and doing the right thing. That's disgraceful. I saw a video today where Jose Altuve lied to Ken Rosenthal about why he did not want his shirt ripped off. And he said, watch my shoulder. And he said two different things. He said, I'm shy. And he said, my wife got mad at me last time. Those are two BS excuses that are not true. The only reason you wouldn't want your shirt ripped off after you hit a walk-off hit is because you're hiding something. That's a fact. And you know who broke this story? The craziest thing about it, you know who broke the story? Ken Rosenthal. So it all came full circle. Ken Rosenthal knew something was up. The investigation went around. People probably reported, snitched on him. The MLB didn't take the grievances seriously at first and started looking deeper into it, and they found something. And Mike Fiers was part of those grievances. And yes, he was on the team and he benefited from it. And he's never going to get blackballed from the league like the rest of them because he came forward and was honest and was like, yo, they cheated. We cheated. That's what happened. And he might get suspended too. And I think the Astros, as a whole organization, every player on that should have an asterisk. And like the Black Sox players, like Shoeless Joe, they need to be held accountable when it comes to Hall of Fame voting in the future. And everyone who was a part of this continues to deserve severe punishments and to be blackballed in many ways. And I don't want the players to be punished as long because they were just compliant to it. The rich and powerful up top need to be punished the most. And this might even end up to me being something where the Houston Astros owner should be forced to sell. Plain and simple. It's bad. It was disgraceful and it was horrible for the game. And now that takes me to my final segment of the day. The NFL predictions. So there's 2 games to decide the fate of the known world of sports. And then there's 3 NFL games left before I am going to die of boredom for like 8 months. I've got April, I got the Ohio State spring game, and then it's just summer break and just no football and free agent rumors and the draft. But you know how stale and tiring those conversations get. There's only so much to debate, and then you get down to it. So the Packers versus 49ers, we'll pick this one pretty quick. Betting line for the 49ers, minus 7.5, they're favored. I think that's wrong. So against the spread, I'm taking the Packers. The Packers defensively are led by some really talented players, Zadarius Smith being the keynote guy on that defense, and then obviously on offense, Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones, Aaron Rodgers, a very good offensive line led by David Bakhtiari, so on and so forth. Lazarus guy, whatever his name is, he's cool. But the 49ers defensively, Richard Sherman's good. Their defensive backs, I talked about them last week. Jimmy Ward's a good player. Their linebackers have played at a high level. Their defensive line's arguably the best in the league. But Rodgers is a guy who can get out, move a little bit, make some throws, sort of evade that pressure and challenge the defensive line a little bit more than Kirk Cousins can. He can get the ball downfield. Devontae Adams is playing out of his mind right now. So when you go into this, the game is in San Francisco, so the weather's going to be a little bit nicer than last week. You sort of look at the records, break them down. Green Bay 6-2 on the road. San Francisco 7-2 at home. You know, at this point, the teams are all so good that it's going to be hard to start cherry-picking those stats. At least in this game. I think Green Bay is going to win this game. I think giving them plus 7.5 is the dumbest thing Vegas has done in a while. Most of the public, 55% of the public's taking it. I believe fully and thoroughly that they are going to win the game Sunday. And I think my prediction, it was going to be Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson that made it to the Super Bowl, the 2 best quarterbacks on that side. And I still think that's the case. I don't know if Jimmy G's up for it in his first huge marquee matchup to get to a Super Bowl. I think this team's doing great. I think people representing them in voting, and I think when you look at San Francisco, they've accomplished so many things so early under Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch that they're going to be there, but I think this is one of those years where it's about the legend you have under center being better than the other guy, and I think that's what's going to win this game for Green Bay. I think Matt LaFleur and co. are going to get it done, and I got Green Bay against the spread and in an outright prediction. So the Packers beat San Francisco in San Francisco and make it to the Super Bowl. The next game on the list is Tennessee at Kansas City. Ryan Tannehill, the GOAT, versus Patrick Mahomes, the most talented guy to ever throw a football from an arm talent standpoint. KC minus 7.5. My gut is telling me Kansas City's going to win this game. My heart's rooting for the Tennessee Titans. And if you've listened to my show, the 53 episodes I've done it, you know how hard those decisions weigh on me. Derrick Henry, you monster. Can you keep the possession in your hand long enough to slow the most efficient offense down? They had 5 straight touchdowns on 5 straight drives. I don't know if you can defend against that. Mike Vrabel's going to have the system. This is a lot harder to defend than Lamar Jackson because Lamar Jackson can't get out of the pocket and let one fly 73 yards downfield on the run. The Chiefs are 6-3 at home on the year. The Tennessee Titans are actually better on the road than the Chiefs are at home at 7-3, but Patrick Mahomes was banged up throughout the year. So were some of the offensive playmakers. Travis Kelce's a little hurt. You sort of look at all these little things, and I mean, if I'm going against the spread, I'm obviously taking the Chiefs -7. The only way the Titans win this game is close, but guess what? I said that last week. So honestly, I'm picking as a fan of what I want the Super Bowl to be, and we're going Chiefs outright and against the spread. The Chiefs win against the Titans. The Titans' magic runs out. I bet against the Titans every week, so in my heart, I know that's what I got to do if I want the Titans to win, but I do truly believe the Chiefs are going to win. If that confuses you, it should. And those are my NFL predictions. Interesting stories coming up. Let's see if Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers can finally meet and play each other in the Super Bowl, because that would be absolutely electric. I think the Chiefs defensively they keep improving, and I know they came out pretty bad against them, but that second half shows the ceiling of the Chiefs. You got to see the floor too, though, and that's something that's making this a hard pick. But I do believe Patrick Mahomes got his groove going in the playoffs. He won that game. I think Andy Reid is actually a little bit more confident in himself now. So the Chiefs are going to win, and we're going to get that Chiefs-Packers Super Bowl. And we're going to see 2 of the greatest talents to ever play the position go against each other. So to close out the show, I went through a big brand change. I am now an Under Armour guy, so Under Armour send me free stuff. We can make my own custom ones like the Rocks, Blood, Sweat, Respect. I know you guys are needing talent. Mine will be beer, coffee, and podcasting. I don't need respect. The Rocks also says the hardest worker in the room. I will say I get the job done. That's what my shirt should say. Get the job done, because that's all you need. Boom. Under Armour, let's get this worked out. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Chris Rennie CFB, and follow the show on Twitter at Chris Rennie Show. We're trying to get I'm working on it, but Twitter's being a real douche. So, this is your boy, Christopher Rennie, signing out. Hopefully you enjoyed the show today. Subscribe and rate to it, and tell your friends about it, because I'm good at what I do.